Welcome back to the Founders and Builders podcast. Whether you have the urge to start something new or you already have your own company, this is the channel for you. Today we're joined by David Brear, co-founder of 11FS. Now you might not have heard of them, but chances are you probably use their products every single day. They build digital banks. One of my favorite parts of the episode is when David shares often the hardest yet most overlooked aspect of building a company as a first-time founder.
Being humble enough at the beginning to go, actually, we're going to have to do everything. There's nobody changing copy paper, like that's us, that's what we do,
So without further ado, thanks so much for listening and let's get into it. David, thanks so much for joining the podcast.
No problem at all. Lovely to be here.
So for those that haven't met you, walk us all the way back to the beginning. Like, who is David and how did we get to where we are today?
Well, I'm a Yorkshireman. Like that's the beginning of this. I was born in Doncaster, scraped being a millennial, just in that sense. So I've been brought up on kind of work ethic over most things. That was kind of very much the mantra of my mum, my dad. Sadly, like the thing that I loved didn't really love me back long enough, unfortunately. So my passion was sports and all of those things, and basketball was very much my passion. It was my first love. Sadly, like I say, not really applying myself across other things, and I was that child who was always really well, turned out, good attendance, good, well dressed. But didn't really have the most academic mindset, really because actually I was very good at the things I was good at, I could get away with being bad in maths if I was great in rugby, so, and that was the plan, my plan was very much to, become a sports person, have some sort of backup to allow me to stay in and around sports, but one bad landing, one bad turn, and all three ligaments in my left knee later, and unfortunately that dream was come to quite an abrupt end, unfortunately. So,
were you playing pro at the time, or
semi-pro? Yeah. So if you sort of told me what would be the most worst situation you could put me in, it would be a dance floor. It would be the worst thing that I could ever do. I hate it. But on a basketball court, I was graceful. I could move really well, and I have calf muscles as big as most people's thigh muscles. But it unfortunately again had to change that gear. So I remember it really well. My dad saying to me, actually, look, if this one door closes, another one opens, right? So what do you do, and how do you want to do it? These are strategic decisions. These are things that you have to go into the beginning of something thinking about what the end is going to be. And I think a lot of people go to university not having that thought. They just pick something they like and, let's see what happens in 5 years' time, right? But he gave me a stack of papers and basically said, pick an industry that by the time you come out of education will still be broken. And, I kind of looked through the papers and, Dad was in oil and gas. So I was like, Dad could probably get me a decent job in oil and gas. That'd be great. That looks like it'll still be a thing, fossil fuels. Financial services, the banking, the insurance space looked like it was going to be a problem for a long time. And this thing called the internet looked like it was going to be a thing. So being a bit greedy, I sort of plumbed for two. I kind of went down the computing route. Thankfully, the first year I got a basketball was 5, but the first year I got a computer was also 5. My dad was really into mathematics and computing, so really sort of instilled that in me as a baseline foundation for pretty much everything else that you do. Logic, at the heart of everything. So yeah, I kind of plumbed for computing and really set out on how do I apply technology to financial services. And really with that kind of went, well, how do I see as much of financial services as I can do in order to understand the problem. If you don't really understand the problem from all of the different angles, then you're never really going to be in a place to solve any of those problems. So yeah, I kind of first job was in a great usability agency called Foolproof. Literally sat through thousands of hours of people having the most minute problem with digital capability, but it resulting in them having really significant problems, either working with that organization or buying something from that company. And you get to kind of understand what good user experience, what good services really look like. From there, went to a big global insurance business. I've I think, you sort of talk about careers. I made a career in being in the right place at the right time, quite frankly. I'd love to tell you that, I'm so clever, or like, I just pull these things. A lot of it is luck and being in the right place, right? And a lot of that is kind of hard work of making those things happen as well. If I sort of talk about education, going from sports science and human biology to business and maths and computing, like that's a pretty big leap to take, and a very different group of people. I remember very vividly the first day of A-level computing, and I'm used to being the sports guy, you know what I mean? So I'm like, why is nobody talking? Like why is everybody silent? And when they ask a question, why is nobody else putting their hand up? Like, why am I there? Like,
so they can be really different crowds.
Very different crowds, yeah. And actually, very different communities of people, but actually, the passion for the thing, albeit the thing being something completely different. It's like, I'm not big on classical music, but I can appreciate it. If you can appreciate somebody else's passion for something, I think that goes a really long way of understanding what it is that motivates them. You find people who are deeply passionate about the absolute minutiae of computing that, there was people whose faces would light up when we were doing networking classes, and I'm like, why are we networking, and what game can we play when we've networked? And it's like different people have different interests, but actually if you can get a consistent thing of why we're all together to do something, you can all achieve something. But yeah, I mean, I kind of went into my undergrad degree of computing after A-levels and had done okay. But I really sort of vividly remember the kind of moment where I realized that I'd just sort of coasted through, similar to high school. It was kind of I'd done okay, but I'd just not really applied myself. And it was, yellow railings outside, opening those little sort of perforated envelopes and finding out I had a 2-1, to realizing that actually there's probably 600,000 or 700,000 other people with exactly the same qualification at exactly the same level. And as somebody who kind of likes to differentiate himself, I'm sort of painfully individualistic in that sense, in terms of I've always struggled with anything that puts me in a uniform or expects me to stand in line, not because I am antagonistic, but because I think it takes away from you as an individual who you are, Then actually I just realized like I'd wasted a massive chance. And what could I do to create differentiation? Actually, if there's going to be that many people with all the same CVs, then why would somebody employ me? So I went into the masters and just said, look, it doesn't matter how many people are going to be in this room, I'm going to work harder than everybody else. And that went well. Came out with that double first, which is great. Really kind of felt like I'd unlocked something mentally, actually, not kind of like again, not like I'm so smart, but actually I feel like I can sustain things that other people couldn't. And because of that, and applying that to every semester and every subject matter in that master's, I got the outcome.
Well, I feel like you get a lot of self-respect from putting yourself to the test, and until you have really applied yourself, you don't know quite how far you can
push yourself. Yeah, but it's relative though, isn't it? It's all and it's funny, I've got 2 kids, and you're trying to figure out actually how do you instill some of this in them, because ultimately wanting something, and because everybody wants something, I'd love to be, we all want things that we can't have, but I want to be 6'6", right? I can't, it doesn't matter. I can wish as hard as I want, but I'm not going to be 6'6". But could I be, could I get a 6-pack? Yeah, I could get a 6-pack. Do I have the determination, grit, and the willpower to do it? Well, not a lot of people do. It's same as building a business. It's same as achieving a degree. It's the same as anything. Like actually, most people have hopes and dreams, but that doesn't translate into a decision that you make every day. I would say it's kind of like every decision you're moving towards something or you're moving away from it. And same like every transaction. If you buy yourself a new set of trainers, is that moving you towards your financial goal or away from it? That takeout for lunch, is that moving you towards your diet goal or away from your diet goal. And actually, if we break all of these things down to the smallest decisions, then arguably every day are you making more good decisions than bad decisions is the answer, and that's the ultimate test I try and find. And again, with my son now, Josh is only 12, but we've gone through different iterations of how do we get them to understand finances. Not like, son, sit down and let me tell you about compound interest. It's like, it's not that. It's more like, actually, money that you give them has no meaning because they've not had to do anything for it.
Yeah.
Therefore, the exit of it, spending it on anything, has no value. It has no meaning to them. So he's got a paper round, and he's getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and 25 quid or whatever it is that he's getting every week it has so much greater meaning now because he's sacrificed something for that, if that makes sense. So it's funny, isn't it? Those little pieces that, well, how do you bring about meaning in these things?
Meaning, you're talking like about the daily practices and habits that allow you to attribute some kind of value to your actions. But I've also personally felt, and I'd love to get your take on this, that even though in the day I might be eating well, getting my 8 hours of sleep, getting out and getting sunlight in the morning, doing good work, putting the hours in, I still felt that at some point I lacked some, and what is it all for?
Sure.
And so going back to that point where you just graduated from university, your dad gave you the advice, find the industry that's the most broken, find the problems to solve. How did you create some kind of North Star of where you should be heading?
Yeah, for me, it was initially more like less creating the solution, more creating I used to refer to it as a safari. Like actually you've got to go see the big four. You've got to go and for me that was almost the way of taking control of your career, because people get very bogged down on my employer does this or my employer does that or whatever. But I think there's a difference between the job you have and the career that you aspire to be. So for me it was the safari was about going and learning. So well, I need to learn from a big consultancy. I need to learn from a big FS player. I need to learn, complex financial products as well as retail products. I need to learn from startups. And I need to learn all the different angles to be able to, convincingly have a unique opinion, and B, find an opportunity to solve a problem that potentially other people are not solving very well. So rather than doing what corporates do, which is like, well, I'm gonna do 12 months of strategy, and then it's actually more you've got to kind of plot your safari to take in as much of the things as you can do before you go, do you know what, I know enough, now I'm going to solve this problem, or do you know what, I've learned these things from these places and now I know enough and I can go and do something else. Because I think a lot of people, again, you define yourself by what your employer tells you, and I don't mean just financially. I mean like you're a senior something or other, or you're head of something or other. And I'm like, that doesn't translate into the world where, we will say it's like, okay, cryptocurrency, AI, whatever, you're telling me that actually somebody who's been doing it for 25 years when that only really has existed for the last 4 in earnest, that doesn't make sense, So age and experience becomes null and void when the hours that you can put into something are quite flexible. So yeah, the North Star for me was learning. That North Star was about acquiring skills and acquiring knowledge to the point where I felt comfortable enough to jump out the plane and see what happens. And it was an interesting one actually. That sort of safari. Like I say, I started at Foolproof and did that for a little while. Moved to Aviva, a big insurance business. And Lloyds Banking Group was, I kind of thought, I've got insurance. I should go learn banking. This was March of 2008, which was a really interesting time to go get into banking, just a couple of months before the financial crisis kicked off. So that was, it was a kind of a disaster zone. Actually the world was melting around you with everything that was happening with HBOS and, different banks going under and all of the runs on the banks and all these different things that were happening. But again, if you stay focused on why you're there and what you want to achieve while other people are, freaking out and running away, then you find amazing things can happen. And again, I was in the right place at the right time and was really lucky enough to be given some great opportunities to build out the transformational capability in Lloyds Banking Group and, pitch up to the board about why, people like Apple, people like Google are going to fundamentally change what it means to be a financial services player. And hey, if we don't do this now, we're part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And after that, then I went to I was like, okay, I've kind of ticked off a number of parts of this. What does a gigantic management consultancy look like? So went and ran Gartner's global digital banking capability, and that was amazing. When you're a Gartner consultant, the brand carries so much emphasis, and actually people listen to you in a completely different way. And that's an interesting thing to think about. The amount of flights over to somewhere far-flung for an hour that I would get done to go and give my opinion on a problem, or the amount of CEOs in the UK I was the bat phone for to, hey, we've got this problem, how should we think about it? Or have you got an hour to stand around a whiteboard and talk about this? I got to the scene of many interesting problems, and was a big driver for a lot of those solutions, which is good. And it got to a point, and I remember it really well, sitting in Egham, which is where Gartner's office was, where I was like, it's funny, the things that you aspire to and work so hard for, that actually when you arrive at that point in that summit, that you go, do you know what, this is actually not what I want. And I remember the conversation with my wife and my mum, who sadly has passed away now, going, I know I've worked really hard for this. Like, I know it's took me a long time, and don't get me wrong, the salary is great, but the reality is this is not what I was meant to be doing. So I think I'm going to quit it, and I think I'm going to start a business.
What were you feeling at the time? What was the itch you were trying to scratch?
It was kind of a frustration, really. I think every business goes through cycles. And actually, if you look at any consultancy, if you look at any bank, if you look at any business at all, like the person who begins it with a great purpose. But over time, what they become is what their business model is. And actually, for me, I want to solve problems. I want to improve the industry. I want to make it a better place, because ultimately, actually, it's so much harder to get out of bed every morning if the only thing you're coming to work for is money. So for me, it was actually this industry, the sort of clients and the service side actually are antagonistic to one another. There's a kind of the disease and the drugs, they support each other to a certain degree, but equally they never really solve the problem. And for me, that was where I was like, I think there's a better opportunity here. There's something where suddenly you've got design agencies, and you've got marketing agencies, and you've got offshoring build partners, and you've got strategy partners, and you've got a consultancy, but not a management, and all of these things for big organizations have to come together in this weird tapestry to solve real problems. And that's not how the success of something like a Revolut or a Starling or a Monzo happens. It's all about small multidisciplinary teams being able to kind of be in the same room, whether that's literally or virtually, to solve small problems and listen to consumers of what those things are. So really the revolution that happened to what the internet, what digital has brought about for pretty much every industry, has happened to every business supporting those industries as well, whether it's the banks themselves or whether it's the people that are advising those banks. So that disruption for me was, fundamentally this is an opportunity to pull together a group of people who have actually done this stuff, not just talked about it, and have a bash at doing something else.
So that was the seed for 11S. What was the kind of flag in the ground that you pivoted around? Was it actually the first thing we need to solve is multidisciplinary teams for fintech problems?
Do you know what, it's a funny one. So with 11FS, it was very much about. I'm a big believer, if you get people believing something, then good things happen. And it sounds very sounds like I'm describing fairies. If you don't believe in them, they don't come true type vibe. But there's something really in that. So for me, the first problem that we were solving for was that actually everybody is solving the wrong problem. Actually, if you look at what the industry has been doing, it's spending trillions of pounds, trillions of dollars all around the world, is digitizing themselves really rather than actually embracing what digital is. If digital is a small team sport, and fundamentally if digital is about much more complex intelligent services to solve problems for you, then actually if you're investing in it just to take out people and paper and buildings, then you're doing it wrong. You're back to the point that you made around what's your North Star. If your North Star is wrong, well, actually all of your actions can be right, but you're going to the wrong place. And that's what we've really seen with financial services embracing digital. Actually, this isn't just a website and you're distributing the same products that you've had, those dumb analog products. It isn't that. It's not digital distribution of the thing that we've been doing for 300 years. It's something fundamentally different to that. Because if you think of anything that is done amazingly well in a digital world, look at the advent of digital music. Actually, we've gone from sort of physical records where you can buy it and you can own it, but there's somebody else in control of it, curating it. Like the CD I bought for Nirvana when I was 12 or whatever. It's like there was those 3 songs I wanted, the rest of them I'd never heard of, right?
The amount of time I've sat in iTunes, copying, creating custom playlists, burning to my own album, which was basically an intermediary for what we have today.
Yeah, you have those 13 bangers and none of the kind of filler stuff, right? But the difficulty with those systems are actually they make all the money off the 3 and the rest of them are just filler, So, but with, CDs progressing to, digital music, you talk about iTunes, that was still the same construct of music. You were just buying it digitally rather than buying it in an analog format. Right. So you still had to buy the album, but you were getting the same waste in that sense. But Spotify is a service. You don't own the music, you rent access to it. And no longer do you need to curate playlists, because actually you really love the music from The Sopranos, somebody's done that. There's a playlist there. You engage with things in a very different way. Spotify is a music system. iTunes is a HMV on the internet. And actually the things that win out in a digital world are much more service-based than they are product-based. Even if you look at something like Amazon is a service. It's not really about the products anymore. If like me, Christmas is a bad time for me. Just dealing with the recycling of Amazon boxes, basically. It's a real problem. But I know I can rely on them. And are they a little bit more expensive? Sure. But actually, do I rely that they're distribution channels, that if there's a problem I can return it, unlike that random Instagram advert for that widget I never knew I wanted. The minute that they've sold it, that website disappears, right? So the service wrapped around those products is why Amazon is really important to me. And it's the same. If you look at anything, you pull out your phone now, any app you use a lot today, it's the things that it does for you and the continuation of the improvement of those things to build out a better system. So, Airbnb is a really good example. Uber is a great example. Bizarrely, they've pulled together other people's things to brew, what are they? They're not really competing with taxis. They're the sort of chauffeur for the mass market. And so I think there's a way of thinking about the advent of technology that actually it isn't just a sedimentary rock of building on layer and layer and layer and this is just a slightly better widget. But actually with the advance of the internet and what we've got with technology, it's now it is practical to give 10 times better service and for a 10 times lower cost.
Super quickly from me. If you're enjoying this episode, please don't forget to hit subscribe below. Founders and Builders is a new channel, so it would help us massively. Okay, now let's get back to it. And it feels like what you're describing that the banks were trying to do with digitizing their services
Yeah.
It's similar to, the early days of the internet. The first web browsers were basically yellow pages
Yeah.
with links, and then Google came along with a free text interface and said, what would you like to know about?
Yeah.
How do you, it feels like the strapline that's capturing everything that you're saying is, rather than building on what we have today and making it digital, what does the end customer care most about, and how do we work back from that?
Yeah, I think there's two elements to that, because it depends on what that answer is. Because actually, if you look at different industries where customers can decide that, Burger King, they're like, you can have your Whopper however you want to. Burger King are great. I prefer their burgers. McDonald's is wildly more successful, and you get the Big Mac how you get the Big Mac. You know what I mean? So there's an element of like standardization of good things that I think work for people. And actually, the more complex the industry, the more important that is. You don't get patients in a hospital telling the surgeon how to do the thing, but you do get them involved in the decision because it's a big decision, right? I sort of feel like financial services is a very similar thing, which is we can make it as easy as you like to move money or make payments or whatever, but ultimately all of this stuff is competing with things that people actually want to do. We always say it's like nobody's like, ooh, like I can't wait to do some payments. It's like that's just not what normal people say. Like they have real lives and kids and football and fun things and all the other stuff that they want to do. But there are people out there who are obsessed with financial services. Financial advisors or wealth managers, or so there are systems that you can put in place in order to become better off financially, but actually every financial services provider on the planet are just still giving you sticks and stones. It doesn't fit. It's like if Samsung gave you all of the instruments to make a TV, but not actually give you the TV. It's like, no, I'd like to watch the programs. I don't want to be I don't want to be a technologist building these things. I always say I have no idea how a combustion engine really works, but I know how the pedal works, and that's the only thing I need to do, right?
Yeah. The vendor has kind of abstracted away those things that I shouldn't really need to think about.
That they should do, yeah. In financial services, I don't think they do. Like if you want to buy a thing, well, should you save for it? Should you use credit cards? Should you take out a loan? Should you use cash savings you've got? Or, all of these things are options, but actually what's missing for people who, have been bemused and confused by financial terms for the last 20 years of their lives, like actually what people are looking for mostly is help. And digitizing financial services, if anything, is removing that help, because essentially it's taking people are, you wouldn't think for somebody who advocates digital in such a way, digital is great, but people are really good, like they are deeply empathetic. Actually, they are really good at going, actually, I can read your face and that acronym I've just used makes no sense to you at all. Let me break it down for you. So bringing that mix of those two things, I think, is really where businesses can scale people properly, not locking them in that little square of property on a high street where you might be lucky enough to find that mortgage advisor that one time when they're not busy or on, do you know what I mean? It's like, how do you unleash them? And then providing them capabilities that put them in control, and again, any industry in the world, like the places where you're using digital to make people smarter rather than to keep them dumb, they seem to be the ones that are doing the best.
And so for the listeners, founders and builders, maybe already working on their own startup or aspiring to, could you walk us through like the key milestones for like the inception, let's say, of 11 FS and how you went about like validating the problems that you thought were there to where we are today with the business?
Yeah, I think the validation was, and it's great. It's always, if you can use other people's time and other people's money to validate your ideas, again, that Safari was very much that validation because, seeing it firsthand, feeling it firsthand, in the bank, I spent 99% of my life trying to convince people to do the right thing and only 1% doing it. Startup world is completely different. Like you decide quick and then you take action because cash flow disappears. And if you, let's schedule that meeting for 3 months from now. It's like, hey, if we don't solve this today, like there won't be 3 months from now, right? So it's very different. But the inception was very much about, do I believe this enough to give up a highly paid job and wearing lovely suits and being flied around the world? Yeah, I think I do. Am I prepared to risk my reputation on it? That was like the scary bit because, again, it's easy to kind of have a good idea. We can all go retrospectively that Uber sounds very sensible, but there was only one company, there's now probably 6 or 7 that have copied them, but there was one company who did it first and made it work. So for me, it was a kind of going through these things of like, have I ticked enough boxes that actually I've got I've got a cash buffer in the bank that if it goes wrong, I've got a bit of time, or, that if I place my reputation on the line for this, what does that mean,
When you say reputation, I'd love to kind of come back to this because it sounds to me like you saw problems. There wasn't a question whether there was stuff to fix in financial services, but the next question that you brought us onto there was, even if I tried to solve the problem, what makes me think I'm the person or we are the team that are going to win out?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's the old adage of nobody gets fired for buying IBM, right? Some of the slowest moving parts of any business is the procurement departments. Had many a fight with many of them. So actually, just because you know the answer, just because you can solve the problem, it doesn't mean somebody will be able to buy from you. Some of the weirdest things in the first couple of years of first 3 months of existence, our first 11FS website we built because a bank wouldn't procure us without having a website. So it's like, yeah, you're not a real business. There's a box on our procurement thing that says, what's your URL? If you don't want to have one of those, we can't do it. And it's like, I guess I'll go build a website then, So, and this is a big UK bank, right? So it's the process is overtaken common sense, right? But then you bump into those things. And I think the biggest challenge for anybody, I think, starting something up like that, particularly if you've come from a corporate background of some description, is, are you an operator or not? Are you people get really senior in banks, but actually the more senior you get, the further away from the problems or the further from the cold face of solving those problems that you really become. And that I've always been a kind of a sleeves up and solve the problem type of person rather than the sort of corporate side of it, if that makes sense. But even still, I remember myself and Jason Bates, who co-founded Starling and Monzo, and super smart guy, like one of the best people I've ever worked with. First office we had, I remember me and him going to it and going, it was literally like half the size of this room, and it was kind of like the place that at Gartner you would put shoes. It was like it was that size. But we were very quickly, it was like that was our home, and we were doing amazing. We were up in level 39, doing amazing things and working with really amazing people. There was Innovate Finance just around the corner on the same floor from us, and we were really lucky that we struck up a great relationship with Lawrence Wintermeyer, who was the CEO of Innovate Finance, who, every couple of days knock on the door and talk about things, and it just kind of went from amazing opportunity to amazing opportunity. Like I say, it's you've got to be smart, you've got to work hard, but you've got to be lucky to be in the right place at the right time as well. But yeah, being, I think, humble enough at the beginning to go, actually, we're going to have to dip down to do everything. There's nobody changing copy paper. There's nobody kind of doing, admin. There's that's us. That's what we do, And then, you're winning the work and doing the work, and hopefully you can start hiring some people so you can win the work and they can do more of the work. And then quickly you've got people winning work and doing work, and you're figuring out, well, what's the problem I can solve and what's the next thing I can do? But, the advice I guess for anybody thinking about starting a business is, talk to your family and friends to make sure you've got the support at home to do that, because it's really hard. It's a really hard thing to do. It's very lonely, particularly if you're the CEO of something where people think, the CEO of anything, it's like, you're the king of the ship and all these things. But really, if you do it right, you're the person who all the problems stop at. You have to be helping people all around the business, because when you're in that hyper growth space, you're breaking things quicker than you're fixing things. Actually, whether it's rituals and rhythms of scaling from no people to 5 people to 15 people to 50 people and actually every time you think you've got a process in that's going to scale to whatever, you don't.
There's this sense of what's got me to where I am today is not going to get me to where I need to get.
Yeah, because actually if where you are is where you ultimately want to be, it's like you probably needed to dream a bit bigger, right? And actually I think almost just a realization that whatever it is that you're doing, and I don't care if it's cupcakes or building banks for people or, whatever. Like you could be, building AI models, whatever. Like it's a people thing. Like, and actually if you don't get the people bit right, and by that I mean, why do people work for you and not with somebody else? Like, why do they turn up every day excited to do that thing? Yeah. Like, how do you make sure that, and particularly in the early stages, if you have 5 people in the room, well, actually, how aligned are you on what the real problem is? Because if you're not super, super, super aligned on day one, then 763 days into it, you're going to be really, really far apart by then. And that's hard because, I know that now and every subsequent thing, but you sort of feel small pains with it to start with, and then you'll feel bigger pains for it as sort of time goes on. But I'd say for anybody who started it, like, well done for getting in. Like actually now you're in, you've got no choice but, it's like jumping in a pool, you've got no choice but swim, right? So focus on solving problems. And I, really focus on making sure you've got a great founding team around you as well. Jason, for me, and people like Ross Methvin, who runs one of the founders of the business and runs a business in the business now. That's the weird thing with 11FS. We started with a thought process and a mindset almost, that digitized is wrong, digital is the future. The rest of it we've kind of figured out for us as we go. What do we do with that? What do we make? And now we are a technology business, we're a consulting business, we're a research business, we're a media business. Like we've got multiple businesses and multiple people running them underneath it. Because essentially, again, if you can get people to gravitate around an idea really effectively, then what you do and how you do it pretty much falls out from that.
Yeah. There's one thing within this that I'd love to get your thoughts on. Everyone's heard the notion that enterprises don't self-serve. And then within enterprises, let's just take the most conservative, which are probably healthcare and banks. So if enterprises don't self-serve and you're starting a business and the risk isn't, can we build it? Because in theory, we can build anything. How did you approach finding not just problems, but the right problems to solve and the people that cared about solving them most?
Yeah, I mean, every enterprise thinks they do it the best way, even down to like contractual structures and terms and, blah, 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 blah. So like trying to create standard terms and conditions for things like Pulse, which is a benchmarking product, that is self-service, is complex because, again, every procurement department thinks they do it best, But I think it's a difficult process to go through because essentially, if you say no at the beginning, you're turning down really great opportunities. I'd say in the beginning of every business, the answer is yes to most things. Because essentially what you've got to find is the things that give you the ability to earn your way towards doing the thing that you actually want to do, right? And for us, that was about finding like-minded people. Because, if you try and sell mass market, the people who buy, don't get fired for buying IBM or Accenture or whatever, if you try and sell to those people, because essentially, even if you're there to help them, actually their whole organization, that organ will be rejected by that body, then it's too hard work and you'll starve doing it. So for us, it was about finding like-minded people, the pirates of the high seas who feel some affiliation towards the way in which we see the industry, because essentially those people are the ones that are there to change that organization and ultimately there to change the industry themselves. We've been really lucky. I mean, if you look at somebody like Dennis Govan at Standard Chartered, who we built a bank called Mox over in Hong Kong with, I knew him at Garanti Bank before he was Standard Chartered. I know him now, given the 15 things that he's up to, building financial services stuff for Besiktas Football Club and all sorts of things. But he is somebody that I could go on a 2-week holiday with and we would get on really well. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I think early on in a business, you've got to find people who you can spend a lot of time with and you can create a good relationship enough to go, that's not right. We need to do it in this way, rather than doing what bigger businesses do, where the people who work at them don't really care about solving the problem, which is whatever you say, boss. And that, somebody like Alison Rose, when she was at NatWest, was exactly that. She was there to make that business better. She was there because she'd been at the company for 25 plus years in various different departments, from being a graduate in various different things to being the CEO when we met her first of the commercial bank. We actually didn't know who she was the first meeting we went to. Me and Jason were invited along to go and present at a meeting, and London traffic was crazy, so we were running along the thing to get to Bishopsgate, sweating when we went in the room, and we were like really apologetic for being 10 minutes late. But an hour into the presentation, we were like, "Who's that lady she's like laughing and joking and getting involved?" And the only person who put their hand up when I said who'd read the PSD2 legislation, it's the Payment Services Directive thing, really boring but really important, and it was her. And actually we sort of struck up a relationship from there, and we ended up building a bank for them called Metal, which is doing amazingly well. It's acquiring something like 20% of the UK startup businesses, and finding somebody who they believe the same thing that you believe gives you a foundation of a relationship to actually help them, rather than just telling them what they want. If you had a personal trainer who was like, yeah, McDonald's is fine, just eat whenever you want to, and don't bother with that. Like, they tell you what you want rather than what you need. That doesn't work out too well.
Yeah, but it also is testament to the amount that you show up prepared, not necessarily just to sell 11S, but to share exactly. I mean, you're in the unique position that you're both a technology provider, you're actually building real product that goes in customers' hands.
Yeah.
And you're working across, let's say, 10 of their competitors.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we try and, create the winners, really. So, we won't build another SME bank in the UK because, we believe what we built is what should be built, right? So, and actually, we'd get bored. Like, honestly, building Jason said building Monzo in the UK and Mox in Hong Kong, yeah, they're both retail banks, but they're fundamentally different. So, there's always a, going back to Gartner, there's always a graph of like maturity of, those early adopters are the ones who are trying to do something new or create something new. And actually slowly that becomes mass market, right? So for us, the world's big. We've built organizations in Saudi Arabia or the US or the UK, all over the world. And that's for us is an interesting challenge every time, because you're doing it with different conditions, and it's a lot of fun. Finding those people and scaling that out is always an interesting challenge to do as well. But scaling a team in London where the regulator works in a certain way or talent is freely available, doing it in Riyadh was a real interesting challenge. But we can talk about that another day.
Yeah, so Mox in Hong Kong would be an interesting one. I would imagine like the regulatory landscape, how talent over there works, how they even do business in that part of the world is completely different. What excites you when you look forward into the future with 11FS? Do you see an opportunity here where you're kind of going 0 to 1 for each of these new problems within FS, let's say focusing on Northern Europe? Or are you, hey, we've cracked this in the UK, we feel that's a pretty good leading indicator for the problems that banks in other parts of the world are going to experience. Let's expand that way.
Yeah, that's very much what we did. And it was led by regulatory changes here. The government did a really good job kind of back in 2010, 2012, kind of to sow the seeds of quite a lot of change. So the regulator in the UK got a competition mandate, and actually that allowed new licenses. So the Monzos, the Starlings, the Revoluts of the world, they wouldn't have existed if that didn't happen. And being kind of at the epicenter of that, we were able to then go, okay, the conditions are really similar in Hong Kong, and the regulator out there made very similar moves, very similar in Singapore as well, very similar in Saudi Arabia, very similar with the US. So
what was for those that don't know, including myself, like what were the changes, what were the shifts in what businesses could do with this new kind of competitive legislation?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much, banking is a highly regulated industry, to say the least, So the licensing, the things you have to do to get licenses and keep licenses, and the level of regulatory capital. So, banks take your money, then they lend it to somebody else. They'll give you a savings rate, which is something, and they'll charge it to lend for another rate. That regulatory capital that you've got to keep in the middle, that amount of money, they start to be a little bit more flexible with startup businesses, given certain controls over how much money they could lend. And that sort of stopped the closed system. It was 4 or 5 big banks, and that was it. But actually what that did was it opened the door to sort of that those new challenges to come into the market and be established. And it's been amazing to see that change. The big boys going, well, they'll never, without a neon card and a waiting list, they'll never get any customers. And then look at where we are now. Monzo's 11 million or something in the UK, and that's crazy. Like if you think about the scale that has gotten to, they'll never get licensing. Oh, they've got a banking license, or they'll never be profitable. Okay, they're profitable now. So that competition piece has meant all of the big incumbents have had to step their game up, because ultimately with those organizations coming in and Monzo having a very different approach to how they make their money from a profitability perspective, but how they talk to customers and deal with customers, that raises the bar for everybody, meaning actually all of the incumbents have to step their game up, but everybody from a consumer perspective becomes better off as well. It was a master stroke of change of regulation. And seeing that, the FCA in the UK became kind of the poster boy for innovation around the world. Very much, MAS, which is the Monetary Authority of Singapore, or HKMA, which is the regulator in Hong Kong. They would fly into London to learn how you made this happen, because, not alienating all of the big boys and creating fruitful ground for startups to flourish. It's a pretty hard thing to do, So for us, seeing those changes happening around the world, it was a great opportunity to, take what we've done here and apply it to every other place. Building those relationships is always an interesting thing. Like actually, our office in level 39 to NatWest's offices, it was a pain in the butt before the new Elizabeth line, but you're like 25 minutes away, right? Building a relationship with people on the other side of the world, it's difficult, right? So, for us, things like the podcast was fundamental to it, really. It was FinTech Insider and the content we produce and all the things that we expose. I kind of joke, it's like, if we give away this for free, imagine what we do for money, right? Like if we give you this much insights that research houses would charge you for, imagine what we actually do and deliver, right? But FinTech Insider for us has been a really important part, because I'd say almost if you look back to that origin of kind of a belief system, actually beliefs only if every religion didn't bother telling it to anybody else, they would just be one person and it would die out, right? So, but infecting other people with those beliefs, or educating people about really what problems are within different things, or even just exposing them to the conversations with Lawrence when he popped round and Westminster's doing this or whatever. It's like actually exposing more people to that information or to be part of those conversations was a thing that we really, really believed in. And, for us, the podcast is, 30 plus million downloads. We've got all around the world people engaging with it, to the point where somebody like Standard Chartered, me and Jason, again, we rock up in Hong Kong and, go up in the big tower. And, the lady who was the CEO of Hong Kong had listened to tens and tens of hours of us talking already. So it poses some real interesting problems, because they already know all your jokes, which is a real challenge. So you've got to constantly keep coming out with new material. For us today? You've got to keep coming out with new material. But you just got to be quick at thinking,
But what you're saying is really powerful. Basically, the internet and FinTech Insider in particular has allowed people to get way further down the awareness funnel of David, 11FS, what the team are working on. That by the time they come to the conversation, it's like they've known you.
They're sold, yeah. And it's a belief. Do they believe in you? And actually, we had a really, again, me and Jason had a really great conversation. And I don't think you'll mind me saying this, but Richard Davies, who, when Richard was at HSBC, really, really great guy, went on to be UK CEO of Revolut and a bunch of other things that he's done. He's a CEO of a bank now and doing amazing things. Got us in the room and was like, okay, do you guys actually know what you're talking about, or are you full of shit? And it's like, no, we actually do know what we're talking about. So somebody like that had engaged with it to a point where they were like, no, I believe these things. I don't believe these things. Let's have a conversation. And it starts you at a different place. We really purposely again, Gartner, lots of written content, but I really think video and podcasting is such a disarming thing because actually you get to know the people. And it speaks to actually how we did the podcast. Like if you go back, we've left them all on, like if you go back and listen to the first 10 episodes of FinTech Insider, I sucked, my editing sucked, we were really scared and wouldn't, but and after about 10 of them where we were like, should we just have a beer and talk about stuff? And it's like, that's what we did, like actually it became we left in all of the ums and the ahs. We left in all the places where me and Jason or me and like whoever, we would disagree and we would have, because actually it's humanizing. Like it brings personality to things, We started FinTech Insider to be the loose women and the top gear of FinTech. That's what we wanted to be because it's about the characters on the show and it's about the discussion between them, not really about whatever it's about. I'm not really sure what Loose Women's about. I know Top Gear's vaguely cars, isn't it? But you know what I mean? It's like, that's what people are interested in because, for everybody who's listening to this now, you're walking the dog, you're commuting to your job, you're kind of doing stuff in your personal time rather than sat at your desk going, well, I need to read that, white paper on blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So if you're doing that, you're competing with things that people actually want to do, not just things that they know they should. Yes. And if you make it, we say it's got to be as entertaining as it is informative. And if you do that, then you're meeting the bar. But we've sort of taken that approach to everything that we do, and almost then the narrative on the podcast of like, we'll have a laugh, we'll swear a bit, we'll drink a bit, and we're thought, provocative in what we're doing. Actually, it means when we turn up to a board meeting for a major bank in jeans and t-shirt, or do you know what? I've turned up to a board of a bank in shorts because it was 33 degrees outside. You know what I mean? And that's a rational decision. Turning up in a suit and knitwear and a tie is an irrational decision. So, but because of all the other stuff that we do, people expect it. They don't rebel from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. People are buying you. People are trusting you before they choose to do anything else.
Yeah, to the point, and I won't name the name because I reckon he would still get in trouble, but to the point where there was a CEO of a bank who actually on the super swanky floor got beers in to do the podcast for us. And we were like, at that point, you've made it when the CEO's making an exception of their rules of what they're allowed to do. So, and again, won't name the name.
That's going to be the first of many shows. So we're coming to the last 5-6 minutes now. David, this has been great. For founders and entrepreneurs that are perhaps early on the journey and the long-term vision of what they want to build is unclear. And I think it's, you mentioned at the very start of this conversation that it's always good to start at the end, and then you can figure out what roadblocks you might come in contact with and kind of avoid them if you can. What advice, I love this analogy of the safari. What advice from your experience would you give in, finding the right big four, as you mentioned in the safari example, to go after, like making sure that you're directionally correct when you're in this interesting lull of, I've got this big why and this big vision for what could be changed, but I'm not quite at the end goal yet, and so I haven't received the payoff that what I'm doing is working. Like, how do you chart the course?
Yeah. I think in navigating your own big four, I think there's a few sort of things that become really, really important, which is when pre-founding your own business, it's about, am I learning fast enough? That's the question you've got to continually ask yourself. I used to have like 87 different copies of my CV because the law that I ran to was if I don't add something to my CV every 6 months, I'm not learning quick enough. There's got to be a bullet point that would sit across all of the other bullet points of a new thing that I have achieved. And if I haven't done that, change jobs and be brutal about it because that's the most important thing. It goes back to what I said earlier on. The job is your employer's, but your career is yours. And how you create the narrative around it, how you add value to it, you have to own that. I think a lot of people in jobs kind of look at career progression like it's something should be happening to them, rather than something that they are, you're the narrator of your own life. You've got to create that thing. Yeah. I think when you start a business, we try to operate, it's that, 3 years, 3 months thing. We've done interesting work with people like Gary Vaynerchuk, where his thing is all the clouds and dirt, and we sort of use that analogy a lot. Yeah, so you've got to have the misty mountain, the vision of where you want to get to, but the reality of how you get there is 1,000 steps in dirt, right? So how do you go from where you are to the top of the misty mountain is probably like the first 5 steps in front of you, and then it's another 5 steps, and then it's another 5 steps, and then it's grass, and then it's concrete, and then it's chairlift, whatever, But if you know vaguely what your misty mountain looks like and what you want to achieve, and you know that directionally you're correct, future us will worry about everything else. And that was something, we even say that now, but 11FS is a funny business because we've got lots of different businesses at different points of maturity.
Right, you're almost multiple startups in one company.
Yeah, and changing that mode of, hey, this thing's a 5-person thing that's just getting off the ground, and this thing's a 6 years established, product market fitted, blah 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 blah. So actually that future us will worry about that. That plays a part in all of those different types of businesses. And it's an interesting sort of mantra for yourselves, because actually the old thing of perfection gets in the way of good. Actually, progress is the most important thing. And if I'm really honest, I think that's the thing I'm sort of addicted to. I always say I don't think in startups, in business, in everything, in life really, you never really win and you never really lose. While you're alive, you've always got the opportunity to turn those things around. And for me, that kind of means you're going to take a lot of losses, and you do. Like, it's actually from the outside, everything can always look perfect, but we've lost big bits of work we really wanted to do. We've lost people we really, really liked. And you can be the perfect organization and those things will happen. There's nothing you can do. Over the 8.5 years, people have done weird things I just never would have expected. But actually, what are you going to do about it? My mum was always a person who was like, what's the alternative? Like, what are you going to do? It didn't matter whether, I'm really bad with injections, like needles. I'm super needle phobic. And my mum had blood cancer, and she had to have, injections and infusions and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, how do you do that? How can you possibly, I'd spend half my day passed out, you know what I mean? And it was like, what's the alternative? And I think if you look at what the alternative is actually you get 1 million problems, but you've got 1 million opportunities to solve those problems. And what's the alternative? If you actually think that the alternative would be better than figuring out how to solve those problems, you're probably not the right person to start a business. So for me, it's been an amazing journey. Again, I feel like, our view is very much the industry. We say digital banking's 1% finished. We really think we are as well. The opportunities ahead of us, some of the new things, that we're starting, the last couple of weeks and getting going on those, I think can be incredibly disruptive. And actually, I think that's a big opportunity for people is, when you build a business, when you start a business, I think if you become too fixated on the thing you thought it was going to be, you lose the perspective of what it could be. 11FS is so much bigger than I ever thought it could be. If I had just started it to be a consultancy or a research business, we would have missed all of the other opportunities along the way. And learning to be able to go, do you know what, this thing's not quite right now, but I'm not going to lose that opportunity. Or, hey, I really think we should push into America or whatever. I think being able to continually evolve what your business is and recognize when opportunities come along is pretty much the key. You don't get one opportunity when you start a company. You get one every day, one every week, and that's down to what you make of it. The other thing I'd say as well is don't revere process. Any process you put in place, you break as you scale. And whether that's a point on cultural approach or the way in which you prioritize time, or we used to have a ritual at 11FS, which was daily priorities. And actually, if you think about it in a big business sense, if name big company said, tell me what you're doing every day, actually that's a problem. But for us, it was when you're small and you come together and everybody trusts everybody. Actually, the amount of times in corporate businesses where my priorities, the things I know I really have to get done, and the reality of my diary are just completely opposite of one another. So we used to have to start with, it was don't do anything with it. You don't have to tell anybody else, but spend the first 15 minutes of every day thinking about what was the most important thing you could do to move 11FS forward, and then make sure it is the most prioritized thing in your diary. And by doing that, everybody is doing the right thing every day, and everybody is moving the organization forward. It turned into a Slack channel, and everybody posting it, and people helping other people out with it. And then it got to a point where we were just too big to do it, because it's impossible to read that amount of them and engage with it in a meaningful way. So then you do it in smaller teams. But I think being flexible about what's important, but being really specific about what you believe in. What do you believe in about the industry you're trying to change? What do you believe in from a cultural perspective that creates the behaviors that are non-negotiable when it comes to how your organization operates? It's a funny one, actually. We started the business on the digital banking is 1% finished. Do you believe that? Okay, you can work here. That's great. If you believe these types of things, you can work here. We've got to focus on getting shit done. It's a bias towards action. And then shorthand was just don't be a dick. Because essentially we didn't have time to write 5,000 policies for things. What's your policy on business class travel? And it's like, I don't know, just don't be a dick. Actually, if you're flying to Australia and you land at 3 o'clock in the morning and you've got to present at 9, fine. If you're going to Amsterdam and it's a 25-minute flight, just don't be a dick. And actually learning, I'd love to say we knew all this because we were so smart and have you read our book? But it's more, actually, you find the more you empower people and trust people, the more they rise to take that responsibility. So, every so often there's no, we need some more information on that. So we had to double click into what our values and the attributes and the behaviors that we want to exhibit are. But actually, I think there's an element of treating people like adults and you get them to act like it. Organizations where, and there's a lot in the news over the last couple of weeks, isn't there, about you got to be back in the office for 5 days a week or whatever, I've always really believed in, I don't really care where people are. Actually, there's people that I love and I miss if I don't see them, but actually it makes no difference where they are to do their job. So do you want to drag them all into London paying, 15 quid for lunch and 80 quid to get to London to do it? Doesn't matter to me, I think actually the only places that it starts to matter is if you don't trust the people that work at the organization, which I'm very lucky to say that we've done a good job on recruitment and I trust everybody completely. So it's a weird one, isn't it? I think the foundations of business is being what is your purpose and can you instill that purpose, that belief in people enough that they care about it too? That's everything.
Yeah, as you were speaking then, I wrote down exactly what do you believe in? What's your purpose? What's your hypothesis, though? Because I feel like it comes down to that saying, doesn't it? Strong beliefs held weakly.
Yeah.
Have a point of view, but be willing to update it as you go. How important has that been in your life, I guess, personally and with 11S, having here's what, independent of what I can read around me, here's what David thinks?
Yeah, I think people are very scared to share their opinion. I am not. I'm quite happy to share my opinion. But equally, I'm happy to be wrong. I try not to be, but I am happy to be wrong. And I think if you believe you're infallible, you're waiting for a fall. Do you know what I mean? And that's not just building a business. Nobody wants to work for a CEO who thinks they're right about everything, because you can't dictate. The span of control of micromanagement of everything just wouldn't work. And actually, I couldn't do it. I'm a massive believer in macro management. Actually, you hire great people, you give them direction, you ask them how you can help, you get the hell out of the way. Actually, I think that's probably one of the biggest secrets to success of what we've done. And I still think I'm actually a little bit bad at it, and I can get better at it. Because actually, there's so much more things we want to do, and the only way we're going to get halfway down that list is if we learn a way of doing that more effectively. So, But it goes back all the way to what we were saying before, is every business is a people business. Finding the right people is the biggest challenge. But also realizing that if you really do your job amazingly well, actually, and this is a weird one to say, but I'm so proud that so many people who have worked at 11FS have gone on to work at amazing places doing amazing things, because we gave them the strong opinion to be able to go and build their own startup or go and work in an amazing thing or do whatever. And it feels like a loss when you lose great people, but you're not losing them. This is their journey. They're going on to do something else and build. And I find, particularly where you've got the ability to create talent, not just buy in talent, that's often the differentiator between businesses that do well to start with and businesses that can instill the knowledge, the ability, the approach to sustain success.
Last question from me, David. So here's a scenario for us.
Okay.
Let's say 30 years in the future, you and I are sat next to each other on the proverbial rocking chair under the starlit sky, and I turn to you and I ask, David, what was it all for?
I mean, I say this to my kids, why do I work hard for them? Like, actually, I work really hard to make sure that actually, every generation wants to give a better quality of life. Like my dad went from being a miner to running, an IT division, because essentially he wanted to better himself to do better for his family, right? Same for me. I'm working hard so I can instill the secret as much as I can find out from life in my children and beyond. I want to change the industry. I think we've gone a long way on doing that. Actually, I think 11FS has definitely had an impact on, every market we've built a thing. The things that we've built are the things that people look up to in that geography, and that's awesome. That's a really nice feeling. I think there's 2 or 3 more businesses we want to start, and I think they'll have very similarly. I think they'll have a very big impact on the industry, but ultimately the customers of them will end up being better off. They sort of say at some point, if you got to kind of put your money where your mouth is, and for us, our mouth has very firmly been in intelligent digital services for a long time. About time we maybe put our money there as well.
Thank you so much for the time. This has been great.
No problem at all.